Hi, my name is Bruna Fernandez. I'm a sociologist and eco-socialist activist, and last year I did a video here on my YouTube channel about Bolsonaro's election and the dangers it presented to us here in Brazil. Today, I'm returning because I want to emphasize that his politics aren't the problem just for us here in Brazil. You may have noticed, for example, that the Amazon forest is burning. It's been burning for weeks, and it's not due to natural causes. Sure, before I begin, I should point out that our environmental problems didn't begin with Bolsonaro. Aggressive mining, agribusiness, and mega development projects have impacted the environment in Brazil for a while, including when the Workers' Party was in power. But the thing is that back then they also did some good things related to the environment, so that period really pales in comparison to what's happening right now. The environmental situation is getting worse very fast here because of the complete disregard the Bolsonaro government has for the environment, among other things. So let's look at the situation today, because more than hashtag pray for Amazon, we need to act for Amazon and the environment in general, and not just here but globally. We have to do that if we want to survive the 21st century and the terrible mess the capitalist system is making out of it. Bolsonaro has the support of the agribusiness class in Brazil, and it's important to understand what this means. In terms of inequality of access to land, Brazil is right at the top. There are many large-scale farms, productive and unproductive, and they make up 47.5% of all of the rural properties in Brazil, according to the 2017 agrarian census. Agrarian conflict is a major problem over here, and peasants, landless workers, indigenous peoples, and traditional populations are evicted, attacked, tortured, and murdered every year due to this. Bolsonaro does not care for environmentalists and indigenous peoples at all. He's repeatedly stated that these environmental concerns stand in the way of growth and progress in Brazil, and that indigenous peoples should simply be culturally assimilated in the cities instead of having access to the territories. He promised that he wouldn't settle any territorial claims, and that's been his politics. In fact, indigenous leaders have been attacked and even murdered this year. And what was his response? To plant doubt about the mining and agribusiness class behind these attacks. The minister he put in charge of indigenous issues is absolutely rejected by the indigenous community, and her politics makes assimilation with fundamentalist religious interests. This is why indigenous peoples have intensified their struggles and demands, but this government is actively avoiding dealing with them. At the same time, Bolsonaro is promoting large-scale agricultural expansion in protected areas. This is the case for what's happening in the Amazon forest today. Deforestation is through the roof, and he fired the director of the Public Research Institute that brought it to our attention. Numbers are a nuisance for Bolsonaro, and he wants to make sure that we don't have research and access to research that reviews the damages incurred by his politics. The fire that's going on is no accident. For weeks now, landowners are trying to expand into forest areas by setting them on fire to create pasture or land for monocrops. These are people who make up Bolsonaro's support base, and he's responsible for this because he not only fails to have the government enforce environmental laws, but also because Bolsonaro, Brazil's president, actually deems these laws a problem. For him, environmental codes in Brazil are too strict, and he's hoping to coordinate with Congress to just change them. He wants corporate mining activities in indigenous territories, and he wants to allow for business development in protected conservation units. He's actually eyeing this area of protected Mata Atlântica forest in the state of Rio for such developments, and I think it's no coincidence it's the same area where he was caught fishing illegally in the past. Also, as an update, after his election, his fine for this illegal fishing was annulled, and the environmental officer that fined him was removed from his post. But that's not all, that's not even close. You know, climate change, that environmental process that scientists have been warning us about, that has led entire communities and leaders throughout the world to ask for immediate action, including children and youth worried about their future. Bolsonaro doesn't care at all about it. In fact, he's aligned with Trump and other climate deniers out there. Based on this, Bolsonaro pulled Brazil out of hosting the UN's conference on climate change, the one we call COP25, which is now going to be hosted by Chile. And there are many grassroots movements in Chile and throughout Latin America already involved in making the more radical demands that we need to make around this issue parallel to COP25. The thing is that our foreign minister, Ernesto Araújo, is a huge climate denier, and he's often spilling nonsense against scientific reasoning and consensus. A friend of mine, André Pagliarini, actually wrote a piece for Jacobin magazine calling Araújo the worst diplomat in the world. I think he's right, unless Bolsonaro really appoints his own son to be Brazil's ambassador in the US like he stated he would. His son is definitely the candidate to debunk Araújo in the race for world's worst diplomat. By now, you must be wondering, what is the Ministry of the Environment doing about all of this? Well, nothing really, because the minister is right there aligned with Bolsonaro. There are amazing people who work at the ministry and other government agencies, and their hands are basically tied. It's hard to keep working towards improving Brazil's environmental standards when the minister is actively working against it. Ricardo Salles is someone we sometimes like to dub the sinister of the environment. He's been convicted, and I really mean convicted, not accused or charged, but convicted of illegally favoring mining companies when he was environment secretary in São Paulo. Salles once stated that climate change is an academic issue, that's something to worry about only 500 years from now. He's disdainful of climate negotiations. He stated that NGOs create terrorism in order to sell lectures, and he even helped to put Teresa Cristina in charge of the Ministry of Agriculture, who is known for her defense of widespread use of agrochemicals, many of which are banned in other countries. Based on all of this, I think you get the picture of the ecological disaster presented by Bolsonaro's government and how this puts not only Brazilians but the whole world at risk. But just in case you haven't gotten the picture yet, I talked to my friend Letícia Camargo, who works directly with environmental policy and who's been compiling data on all of this mess, and I picked out just a few more facts off the list she made. So here we go. Since Bolsonaro became president, supported by a terribly morally conservative and very capitalist Congress, with a few exceptions in Congress, of course, this is what's been happening in terms of environmental problems in Brazil. So far, this government has allowed for 290 new agrochemicals to be used in Brazil, and 41% of them are highly or extremely toxic. Environmental law enforcement activities fell by 39% from last year. A presidential decree basically emptied the Environmental Council, CONAMA, which was an important place for participation from civil society. The government cut 95% of the budget that used to be destined towards fighting climate change. Environmental licensing budget was also cut by 42%, and the minister is always talking about how it's important to make licensing easier. And they also blocked almost 40% of the budget destined to preventing and fighting forest fires. Did you know that? Yeah, it would be ironic if it wasn't tragic and actually right in line with what this government has in mind. If you didn't get the picture before, I think now you do. The picture is grim, the picture is catastrophic. Ecological impacts aren't restricted to a nation state. There are no artificial borders that can hold off these problems entirely. And yes, I know the majority of Brazilians voted these guys in, but we're all in this together, and there are many other leaders like Bolsonaro implementing or hoping to implement these terrible policies in other countries. Ecological action demands that we work together and fight together, and it demands solidarity. This is why I did this update, and I really hope we can find a way to coordinate our movements of resistance, from the environmentalists and the indigenous peoples in Brazil, to the Cumbre de los Pueblos in Chile, to the Zapatistas in Mexico, to those who support various ecological transition efforts in the US and Canada in the shape of a Green New Deal or LEAP Manifesto or whatever program fits into your anti-capitalist political project, to those demanding a degrowth platform in Europe, to kids engaged in strikes for the climate, to island dwellers in the Caribbean and the Pacific who know it's now or nothing. Because it really is now or nothing, you know, and we need to understand that if people like Bolsonaro and Trump stand in our way, We need to fight stronger together to overcome their politics and make room for real change. Change that will guarantee that we survive this century and reach the next one as a healthy, sustainable, and emancipated society. We have protests and demonstrations scheduled in Brazil in the next few days, and I hope you can help to spread the word about it. Thanks for watching.